So please give a warm welcome to Vera Maria Glan from Field.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sticking around and making it nice and toasty in here. Can you guys hear me okay like this? If I ever kind of fizzle out, then please yell at me. I'm going to try and be understandable. So we're Field. Andreas already said half of my talk. I'm going to have to improvise now. We're a studio working in visual arts, and I founded it together with Marcus, who's our creative director, and I'm personally more on the management side most days of the week. We're based in this very nice building in East London. We're actually on the back side of it, which is way uglier, so nobody would ever take pictures of it. We're a team of 12 people, programmers, engineers, designers, people with a CG focus, people with a code focus, sound designers and producers, and a network of very specialized people, some of them in the room tonight, which is very nice. We all really like eating. I think that's why everyone actually sticks around, because there's a very cheap and dirty curry place right around the corner. And we work in visual arts at the intersection with technology in loads of different media. And we do that on commission for brands and as self-initiated art projects. And whether it's commercial or personal work, we always try to create meaningful experience, ideally even cultural experiences. It is a very big word, but what it means in our context is that we try and not create anything that kind of fools people. We like to really be behind everything that we do and not hide anything that we are kind of doing behind the curtain to make money, because we find our time a bit too short for that. And we want to make things that people enjoy, ideally even a big audience can enjoy. And if a commercial project gives us exactly that, a big stage, a big audience, big accessibility, then that's pretty cool. Luckily, that's where advertising is heading anyway, so it's maybe a good time. Our story kind of begins in 2006, 7, 8 maybe. Marcus and I were studying in Kassel at the School of Art and Design. I was working mostly in culture as a producer. Marcus was experimenting around with graphic and interaction design, and we started working together on audiovisual art installations. It was a very liberal school. Some people call it a loophole in the German education system, because you have to write one exam to get in, and then you have one test to get out, and the only thing you have to do in between is stick around for more than 5 years. It sounds pretty easy, but it's actually fucking hard, because nobody really tells you what to do. You don't have a lot of guidance, but in return, an enormous amount of freedom to explore. And if you manage to kind of survive the first year, which a lot of people end up spending computer games and not leaving a dark room, then you're pretty well set to being self-employed later on. At that time, graphic design was in a bit of a transition state, you could say. It was not as clearly defined anymore as it was when we first started picking it up, and as we had been taught by our tutors. It was certainly, or had certainly started to span all sorts of media and disciplines. And of course, digital tools were widely used, but the real potential, it felt, was not really explored yet. And it kind of felt, just instinctively, that a quite fundamentally different form of visual communication would be possible if things were starting to come to life and become dynamic. And bringing code and technology into art and design promised to make that happen. And this way of looking at things became known as generative design. At that time, quite a narrow term, nowadays either absorbed into other things or considered much more widely. What we also picked up from generative design, from the kind of thinking and the approach, was that if you have a basic understanding of how things work, then you can learn almost anything, no matter what it is. You're probably an amateur to start with, but if you get your head into it, if you find the right people to talk to, if you maybe even have an open source community behind it, then you can discover a lot of new ways of creating and making images and making experiences. So this excitement to explore new formats and new techniques and like kind of dive into things that you've never done before is still the way we approach most of our projects, actually almost every single one of them. Me kind of being more in a producer role often, I find it sometimes absolutely horrible because you kind of think, why don't we do something that we know really well? And it kind of doesn't work because then it just gets boring very quickly. So over the past 6 years, we've been working in a lot of different media. Technology has obviously changed massively, but over time we've realized that there is a few kind of key principles and inquiries that we keep coming back to. Some of them were already thoughts that we had when we graduated, when we wrote our thesis. You know, when you're first out of school, you kind of say, I want to leave this behind, and you know, I want to focus on the new stuff now. But then in the last kind of half year, and that's why we wrote this new talk, we kind of realized that a lot of the things that we started with when we were still just producing code-based animation projects are still really relevant, even though our palette of techniques and tools has become a lot wider. So I'm going to show you a few of them and just dot some works into it in between. The first one is maybe even the most important one, and that is that everything is born out of motion. This is what Marcus normally shows at this point, talking about his teenage skateboard heroes. This is Rodney Mullen, who I have learned has invented about, 80 or 90% of all street skateboarding tricks. Because unfortunately, I myself at that time, at that age, was doing something way less cool. I could watch this forever. I really had to kind of force myself to shorten this clip. But I want to show you some work as well, right? So what the two things actually do have in common, skateboarding and dancing, is that they're all about movement, and they're about energy, physical forces, and physical restraint of forces, and also about interaction between people and the environment. And you need to know the theory, but you need to make your body interpret them, which is a very kind of difficult connection to make. And you need your mind to pre-visualize things, pre-visualize a process, and how all of these forces will interact. And everything kind of, you're doing all of that effort to create a visual end result. Could be an image, could be an experience, but it's a visual end result. Here's a recent project that we did, which kind of picked up on this idea of dynamic energy and applied to a tennis campaign. Do we have sound? How are you feeling in the back there? Good, nice, thank you. Feedback is good. The idea here was to pick up on, professional sports analysis and the motion tracking that is used in, in professional performance sports, and kind of just use that as a visual language. And here's some very, very new stuff that I've never shown before. It's not published yet, so consider yourselves lucky. We've been working a lot with Nike in the past few years and had quite an intense phase over the summer to redevelop the aesthetics around American football. Previously, in Nike, but also in many other brands, the visual language of the sport in general was very dark. It was very kind of cliche masculine, and often visually overloaded, very much focused on the threatening side of the sport. And we worked with their brand design team on a new global art direction based on a more minimal design approach, visualizing the energy and also still kind of retaining that aggressiveness. The film was primarily made as an installation, so it was in Nike Town in Wembley Stadium in London. So not, the pacing is considered slightly differently to work on a big screen like this one. This next idea is quite important for our aesthetics, to be honest. We try to stick to a concept that is very minimal and very efficient, very kind of boiled down, so that down the line you can create an execution of it that is really rich and deep. And you have that minimal concept to derive all those micro decisions from that you need to do during the production or development process. And finally, we're trying to create work that is timeless in a way, as hard as that is, trying to communicate through emotion and therefore being very universally accessible as well. Coming back to this big audience idea. Quite a big inspiration for this kind of minimalism is obviously the work of Anish Kapoor. Extremely minimal, and yet there's so much emotion and so much narrative in it. And it's very human as well, even though you don't see anything. This is quite an old project now, but it is a long-time favorite, where I think this idea comes across. It started with a single illustration that we made that was based on sound visualizations. It was supposed to be a record cover. This was in the, I think, second year of Field existing. Our friends were running a label, and we made this illustration for an electronic music artist, and he was driven by his track. And then he kind of changed his mind and wanted to work in a different genre, and our friends who ran the label rejected the image and said, like, nah, I don't really think this is doing anything good, and it's not working for this guy. So we just put it on our website, and it was sitting there for a couple of months. Then somebody called and said, can you please make 10,000 of them? We said, okay. That was 1 week before Christmas. They had a budget of £1,000. It's long gone enough. I never used to tell this, what the budget was, but I'm old enough now. And they saw something different in it. So we worked on this with a paper manufacturer called G.F. Smith. And they were, they bring out these really kind of expensively produced marketing brochures that showcase their kind of specialist papers. And this one was supposed to be about digital print papers. We thought, why don't we really use the potential of digital print instead of just changing the address on something, and created a generative system out of this illustration that created a unique cover for every single copy in the print run. There was, it was an automated process, but there was a lot of moderation in it. We basically we ticked every single picture off, which was a lot of work. And we were doing it in a skiing hut because we had already booked a holiday. But it was fun. And it became kind of, quite a popular thing because you can actually read a lot of things into these very abstract images. So a lot of people found them useful, and because we had 10,000 of them, we could sell a lot of licenses afterwards. The next idea is we want to create experiences that you can actually get absorbed in. This is the first interactive installation that Marcus and I built together as students. I'd slotted this into my talk today, so I thought, it's almost Christmas, I'm being a bit nostalgic. The person, it's actually quite dark. The person in the center of this installation, you can lay down on a kind of bed or bench, and by pointing upwards, you can throw a star into orbit that would play music around you. And it was lovely to play, but it was also really nice to watch it. It created this kind of digital campfire atmosphere. And to be honest, a lot of people don't always want to interact. Some people are kind of happy to step back and observe people interacting and having fun. So this was kind of, whilst we were still students and we got invited to a few exhibitions with it. Unfortunately, I can't show any video of it because we shot it in PAL and it's like this big and it's actually not very good anyway. But it kind of set the mark for us, and we've, everything that we've done since always kind of refers back to this. A more recent example for an immersive environment is this interactive installation that we created for Nike. It transforms your picture into a force of nature. And what we wanted to focus on most was to give the experience a narrative. So it's not just an effect that you step into and when you step out, it's gone. It goes through a lot of different stages. The faster you run, the more dissolved you get. There's like loads of different effects going on. And it builds up to this moment of like getting into a flow when you're running, because that's the kind of feeling that we wanted to kind of stimulate in people. Oh. I could try clicking on it. Worked. Nike made us build this for one day. It was literally up for one day, and I think about 120 people had a chance to run on it. 20 of them were ourselves, probably. But we tried very hard to convince them to put this into retail, and they wouldn't listen. But if you think about immersion today, obviously, then there's virtual reality to talk about. And we wanted to do something with it as well. So this is one of the self-initiated projects that we worked on just this year. We had an exhibition with it in June, for which we designed not just VR experiences, but wearable objects for them. And then we also set them in scene in a series of photo artworks. So it's a story that is told through a whole spectrum of ideas and media and expressions. And in the exhibition, visitors can try out the helmets, play with the VR experiences, and also have a very different kind of access to the same narrative through the photographs. We've basically invented 3 personas. They're explorers of the future, each with a different character, each with their own means of travel and perception. There's one guy who's more a masculine personality. He probably still travels physically into space and into time, into unknown depth. There's a more sensitive character who's maybe a kind of telepathic explorer that doesn't need to travel physically anymore, but it has a lot to take in and to filter. And the third character is maybe the furthest removed, very androgynous kind of personality that is so far advanced from where we are right now that it just looks at our world with estrangement. And each of them has a different VR experience. They're very simple sound toys. You wear a a wristband sensor that just picks up the angle and kind of velocity of your arm movements, and one of them, this one, is in fact based on the same idea as the orbiter that I showed earlier, the ceiling projection, where you're throwing stars into an orbit and then it circles around you. The sound, apologies, sounds a lot better when you're in this thing. It's kind of doesn't work very well in the capture. The beautiful thing that happened when people were wearing the helmets in the exhibition, we showed it in a gallery in London in June, and then at Ars Electronica, where we had the widest possible audience, Austrian general public. It was very interesting. Many of them kind of not knowing why they were even there. But what happened, what I didn't expect, is that because it's a mask, you're really getting into a different persona. You know, when people wear an Oculus Rift, which is inside of this, you automatically look like an idiot. There's no way around it. Maybe this is a way, I don't know. But when people were wearing these helmets, they started to move really elegantly. Even like people that you didn't expect to have a lot of kind of control over their body, they were kind of using both their arms, even though that weren't making any difference. And you know, one person was like doing really elegant dance moves, and another person decided that this was about fighting and that they had to kind of kick. And the experiences were designed so simple that all of these moves, whatever you put into it, were basically successful. And kind of, even though it was a lot of work to kind of man it and to help everyone in and out of these helmets, it was really, really worth it to kind of create this micro-scale immersive experience. Another thing that we keep coming back to is the idea of modernism. We have an ongoing interest in kind of new developments in culture and in technology, and also a belief that technology could change things for the better, so like a bit of an optimistic starting point. And as all the platforms and media come and go, there is a constant need to renew yourself and change the tools, change the languages and the approach that you're using. One of these new approaches that had a big impact on us was the work of Carl Sims, who was a researcher in the 70s and 80s, and he was looking into genetic algorithms and how to breed digital creatures. So the simulation that we're seeing is over several generations, following a very simple set of rules. He would basically make creatures from basic geometric shapes in 3D. I'm not sure this is real time, but maybe it was. And defining their bones and muscles in a rule-based system. And then they're thrown into the simulation, and it's measured how much of a distance they would manage to span. And if you were one of the faster ones, then you would be allowed to have children. Cool. I'm going to keep it playing a little bit. Don't get stuck on that one. So this interest for systems that breed life and kind of emergent behavior is something that we brought into this installation piece that we showed at La Gaîté Lyrique in Paris, which is a really cool museum space dedicated only to digital art. This was a collaboration with Matt Pike. Us being very young. So everything that you see is generated in real time, and these small digital life forms are kind of dancing to a polyrhythmic soundtrack, which is the only fixed element of the whole installation. So each of the bodies, depending on what kind of skeleton they have, whether they have 2 arms and they can be symmetric, or they have just 1 arm, which then kind of makes them go really wonky. Each body kind of interprets the choreography that they get as kind of rules to follow, interprets them very differently. And it's like a big stage show, and for every performance you have a completely new cast. So we were a bit afraid, after having been locked, like you've seen in the making of, locked into this dark room for a week. I was really, really worried that people would not actually want to spend time in the space, and because it was so dark, because it was 40 minutes long, and so like, yeah, okay, people are going to drop in and out and see it for a few minutes, and then maybe it's nice when they come back because they see something completely different. But people ended up hanging out in the space. We saw people kissing in the corners, and some people dancing. It's really cool. So I think that should be like on top of the list of aims, like create something that makes people want to kiss in the corners. It was quite cool to try out how minimal you can go. We really wanted to not stick eyes on anything and make it look like a character in that way. But our hearts and our brains kind of recognize something as a character, as something that is alive, with a lot less. And I heard you all giggling when we were looking at the Carl Sims work earlier. It creates empathy. It's something that makes you feel pity with the clumsy ones, it touches you, and it's a very universal thing. We had a chance to show this installation in China, in Beijing, which was obviously completely different background. And we had people coming up to us while we were installing saying, "Do you realize that these things mean words?" And we're like, "Shit." I actually didn't ask what it meant. Maybe I should have. But then they're always different, so how can you know? So, well, fingers crossed. Holistic and independent is a vague description for something that we're trying to do in every project, is to design the whole experience. Not just the work itself, but also how it appears, how it goes out into the world, how it's distributed, how it's communicated. So we try to very actively initiate and develop concepts, organize the production, the distribution, publicity. We do a lot of press work, even for our clients, and really trying to think through a project from start to finish. And obviously with our self-initiated projects that we show in galleries and festivals, that kind of applies in the widest sense. We've also launched art projects as mobile apps, and see how far does that take us. And in commission projects with brands, we often get involved very early and kind of develop things from a strategic point of view. I've mentioned the Nike American football work earlier, and another big partner of ours over the last year was Monotype. And they are the largest type company in the world because they simply bought everyone else, which kind of, it's a bit like Bayern Munich, I think. So they approached us. Initially, they wanted to do something with data visualization, as it happens so often. And we just got along with them quite well. They have a nice little design team in London, and they're really cool guys. And we quickly realized that they have a lot of catching up to do. They've just managed to realize that desktop publishing has arrived. And they were not really, it's a giant corporate institution. So we created, we first spent kind of several months, 5 or 6 months, just talking to them and just going out really wide and talking about how typography can become smart and responsive and interactive. And then we had this huge bank of ideas that we were really excited about. And then we thought, like, okay, what are we going to start with? And we've decided that for the first things that we go public with, we kind of need to pick people up. And we also needed to pick up the client in a way, because the people that we were working with directly, they were really on the ball. But and they knew a lot of things that were out there. They had done their own research. But the amount of people within their own institution that they needed to get on board was actually the biggest challenge. So we've decided to create 3 installations that were, some of them were interactive, others were just video artworks, where you just have typography beautifully set and like kind of just brought into a digital environment. And that in itself was already like, whoo. But what happened is that it gave them, because we made these films and interactive installations, and then we have some nice images, is that they really ramped up their activity on social media channels, because all of a sudden they had amazing pictures to work with that were clearly speaking a digital language, and not just kind of these old artifacts of kind of handwritten sketches by Eric Gill and what sorts of stuff they have to publish before. So I'll show you a few of the films. We would have loved to do a lot more than this, especially when the client decided to put this under the title of Type Reinvented. We didn't really feel like we have reinvented type yet, but maybe in the next round. And as I mentioned earlier, where the realm where this kind of idea of 360, thinking through, what's the idea that we want to bring across, and how do people actually engage with it in the end, plays out the most is in our self-commissioned works. What we are most excited about at the moment is this physical digital ideas. It's such a buzzword, but it's a buzzword because it's exciting. So we're really, we're coming from screen-based work, and we've done that so often. We've sat in so many dark spaces that maybe it took us a while to realize that people don't live in the dark. But we're quite keen to kind of go beyond the boundaries of screen-based work at the moment, and make objects that exist in the real world, and that you can touch and that make noise when they move, and having all that richness. It's a bit like all of us in CG trying to recreate the beautiful work that Susie is doing, on a speaker with analog particles and fluid matters. So we want to create physical pieces, but still connect them to the digital sphere. And for example, think about CG. You're trying to defy physics, manipulate ray tracing, and kind of play with reflections as you would in 3D. So this is the one that we're working on right now. This is a scale model that is just this big. It's a new kinetic sculpture that we have in manufacture right now, and we'll premiere it at a light festival in London in January. Hopefully we will. It's a giant thing. It's a 3-meter diameter dish made from kind of mirror grade stainless steel, and it's mounted on a pan and tilt like motor turret, so it moves like a satellite dish. You can really, have you seen these kind of images of these big satellite arrays in the desert somewhere, photographed in time lapse, and they're kind of like, they're awesome. So this is not just an artistic project for us, but it's also a really big engineering challenge, because we're having this built from scratch, and we kind of need to get our head into this kind of process of structural engineering, and for this thing to be stable, and lots of other things, like combining motion tracking with theatrical lighting, and we're even building a little weather station that feeds into our system and tells us when the wind gets too strong, because then the thing has to basically stop, because if the wind kind of blows into it too much, it would collapse or like fall over. So it's going to be a lot bigger than this. This was from like a test shoot that we did the other week. As an object, it will kind of interact with people around it, kind of try and make a connection with you through light as a signal. And it will also kind of have moments where it dances its own choreography, and we'll have like a big array of theater lights mounted around it. So there's still a lot of open questions about this. If you have a chance to come to London in January, please do. Then you can see it coming together. We do get asked to do a lot of data visualization quite often, and I have to honestly say I really don't like it. It obviously has an important place, and there's very, very beautiful and clever examples out there, but I kind of see data as a recorded format, as an abstraction of something that was once an organic process, natural movement, human behavior, anything like that. And if you translate that into another abstract thing, a readable visualization or a chart or something, then you don't get anything of the aliveness back out of it that's actually stored in the data. So we like to think about it as data dramatization rather than anything else. And kind of that implies that the data is not readable, and you're trying to instead kind of bring out that Lebendigkeit, the kind of aliveness back out of it. And it obviously gives you a lot more room to cheat, which is nice. This is a piece that we made for Maserati last year. I'll tell you before. Okay, so they've equipped their Trofeo race cars with a whole bunch of sensors, recording everything from acceleration and the kind of the usual stuff, also how it leans into the curve and the heartbeat of the driver and loads of metadata. And they just dumped that over to us. They had no idea what to do with it, and said, "Can you make a film out of it?" And what was really cool was that if you look at Maserati's YouTube stream, they only have live action shots of cars. You know, they all look the same. So this was the first kind of graphical thing with a different kind of look that they had. So we had complete freedom to invent something as long as it felt a little bit luxury. So what we decided is to focus on the soundtrack and visualize that, and then project it back onto the car. The clip is full CG, but it kind of works quite well as kind of trying to bring back the feeling of how it feels to drive Maserati. Not that I would know. as the last clip, I wanted to show you something really old. This is a film that Marcus and I made, I think 6 years ago, and it was for a gallery, for an exhibition that was dealing with private data, and they asked us to just take anything and make an artwork with it. So at that time we were getting started in London, and this topic of originality was in kind of everyone's mouth, and the question whether you're just inspired by something, kind of bordering in a gray area with copying, being inspired, and we just wanted to create something that acknowledged how much we were looking at other people's work, and kind of put it out there and say this was part of the process. So we downloaded all our inspiration images from like Flickr likes and our Evernote notebooks and everything that we had, and put them into like a really big image stream, and then kind of we're creating an ocean thing that you kind of dive into this stream of inspiration. Thank you. One more thing. If there's anything you want to ask, I'm going to stick around. Talk to me. And the other thing I wanted to say, a little bit of advertising. We're looking for a few more people to join our team. And I know that there's a very high condensation of really, really good people in this room. So if you're interested in this kind of work, then please talk to me, or just find the email on our website and drop us a line. Thank you.